There exists a weapon that changed the course of entire battles, that transformed common soldiers into legends, that impressed military strategists, and that cost less than a pair of military boots. This is the story of how $30 bought an extraordinarily effective weapon. This is the story of the Mosin-Nagant rifle. The weapon that proved military superiority is not measured solely by the price tag. When we think of the great weapons of military history, imposing names come to mind. The American Springfield, with its refined precision and impeccable finish. The German Mauser, synonymous with elite engineering. The British Lee Enfield, pride of the empire. But there is a weapon that rarely receives the spotlight it deserves. A weapon built under the most adverse conditions imaginable, mass-produced in improvised factories, carried by soldiers who often could barely read. And yet, this simple weapon, this unpretentious tool of wood and steel, achieved something extraordinary. It didn't just compete with the most expensive and sophisticated weapons in the world. It surpassed them. The year is 1891. The Russian Empire, vast and complex, faces an old problem. Its troops carry rifles that can no longer compete with modern European powers. While other nations invest in cutting-edge technology, Russia needs something different. It needs a weapon that can be produced by the millions, that could withstand the extreme cold of the Siberian steppe, that could be operated by newly recruited peasants with minimal training. It needs a weapon that simply worked no matter what. Enter Captain Sergei Ivanovich Mosin, a military engineer who understood a fundamental truth. The perfect weapon is not one with the best materials or the most elegant design. The perfect weapon is one that fires when you pull the trigger, every time, without fail, even when the world around you is falling apart. Mosin worked side by side with the Belgian brothers Léon and Émile Nagant, taking elements from various designs and creating something unique. The result was a bolt-action rifle that combined simplicity with high effectiveness. Before we continue this fascinating story, if you're enjoying this content, subscribe to the channel and leave in the comments what time you're watching this video. Your participation helps build our community of military history enthusiasts. The design of the Mosin-Nagant defies everything we think about quality weapons. While the American Springfield had polished finish, precision-fitted parts, and finely worked wood, the Mosin was rough, utilitarian, almost primitive in its simplicity. The parts had generous clearances. The finish was irregular. The wooden stock was just that, wood cut and fitted without ceremony. But there was genius in this simplicity. Each clearance, each extra space, each apparently careless aspect had a purpose. This rifle was designed to function when covered in mud, when frozen at 40 degrees below zero, when the shooter's hands were trembling from cold or exhaustion. Let's consider the bolt, the heart of any rifle of that era. The Springfield used a two-lug locking bolt, precise and refined. The Mosin used a simpler design, but one that could be disassembled and reassembled with bare hands, without tools, even by an illiterate soldier who had never seen a weapon before. The stripper clip feed system was direct and reliable. The iron sight was basic but robust. Every aspect of the rifle said the same thing. This was made to function, not to impress. But the true genius was in the cartridge. The 7.62 by 54 mm Russian. This was not the most accurate cartridge in the world. It was not the flattest in its trajectory. But it had something that mattered more than any technical specification: effective stopping power. The energy transferred by the projectile was considerable. And unlike more sophisticated ammunition, this cartridge could be produced in massive quantities using locally available materials. Now, the Americans had the Springfield, and what a weapon it was. The 1903 Springfield model is considered by many the best bolt-action rifle ever produced by the United States. Its finish was impeccable. Its accuracy was legendary. Experienced marksmen could perform miracles with a Springfield in their hands. The American military invested a fortune in the development and production of this weapon. Each Springfield was a work of engineering art, with tight tolerances and first-quality materials. A new Springfield cost the American Treasury something between $100 and $150 of the time, a fortune when converted to current values. The Mosin-Nagant cost $30, sometimes less. In times of mass production during the wars, the cost dropped to absurdly low levels. But here's the question few ask: Why does this matter? Why should the price of a military weapon make a difference when lives are at stake? The answer reveals something profound about the nature of modern warfare. War is not about having the best individual weapons. War is about having enough weapons in the right places at the right time. It's about logistics, numbers, reliability under the worst conditions. An army equipped with 100 perfect rifles faces a disadvantage against an army with 1,000 good enough rifles. This is the pragmatic mathematics that defines military strategies. This is the reality that the Mosin-Nagant perfectly represented. Let's travel to World War I. The muddy fields of Eastern Europe become the definitive laboratory for testing these opposing philosophies. Russian soldiers, many of them peasants torn from their villages, carry their Mosin-Nagants through flooded trenches. The rifle is dropped in the mud, trampled, exposed to freezing rain for days. When it's time to shoot, the soldier picks up the dirt-covered rifle, works the bolt a few times to clear the mechanism, and fires. It works. It always works. On the other side, in Western theaters, American marksmen with their Springfields face different challenges. In direct combat, in controlled conditions, the Springfield was superior in almost every measurable aspect. Its accuracy was notably better. Its finish allowed smoother operation. But when conditions deteriorated, when mud entered the tight tolerances, when extreme cold affected the precisely fitted parts, problems began to appear. They weren't fatal problems, but they were problems the Mosin simply didn't have. The true revelation came when elite marksmen began comparing the two weapons. Here, you would think, would be where the Springfield would shine. After all, elite marksmen need absolute precision, and the Springfield was indisputably more accurate on paper. But something fascinating happened on real battlefields. Marksmen who picked up a captured Mosin-Nagant discovered that, at realistic combat ranges, the difference in accuracy was negligible. And the Mosin had unexpected advantages. The Russian rifle was longer, which meant greater projectile exit velocity. This translated into better penetration through light cover. The heavier cartridge maintained energy at long ranges better than many expected. And perhaps more importantly, the rifle was less sensitive to ammunition variations. A Springfield could be more accurate with premium quality ammunition, but the Mosin maintained acceptable accuracy even with ammunition produced under less than ideal conditions. There was also the question of field maintenance. A well-trained armorer could work wonders with a Springfield, keeping it in perfect condition. But how many well-trained armorers exist in an army of millions? The Mosin could be maintained by any soldier with basic knowledge. The parts were interchangeable between rifles, not perfectly fitted to each individual weapon. This meant that in the field, under combat conditions, repairs could be made quickly by cannibalizing damaged rifles. Now we advance to a conflict that would truly test these weapons to their absolute limits. The Winter War between Finland and the Soviet Union, begun in November 1939. Here, the Mosin-Nagant would face its definitive test, and would do so under the most extraordinary circumstances imaginable. The Finns, outnumbered 50-1, took Mosin-Nagant rifles, many of them captured or bought from Russian surplus, and transformed them into tools of asymmetric warfare. Finnish marksmen, moving through snowy forests in temperatures reaching 40 degrees below zero, used these $30 rifles to create one of the most impressive demonstrations of military skill in modern history. The most famous of these marksmen was Simo Häyhä, a Finnish soldier who would become a legendary figure. Häyhä used a standard Mosin-Nagant, often without even using the telescopic sight. He preferred iron sights, arguing that they didn't fog up in extreme cold and didn't reflect sunlight that could reveal his position. With this simple rifle, Häyhä is credited with extraordinary effectiveness during the conflict, with historical records indicating more than 500 successful actions in just 100 days. And he achieved this with a weapon that cost less than a box of quality ammunition for a Springfield. But Häyhä was not an isolated case. Dozens of Finnish marksmen achieved notable levels of effectiveness. And all of them used variations of the same basic rifle that Russian soldiers carried. What does this tell us? It tells us that the weapon is just a tool. In the right hands, under the right conditions, a simple and reliable tool surpasses a complex and temperamental tool. The Soviets, ironically, were facing major losses due to their own weapons in the hands of the Finns. But there was a larger lesson here. The Finns proved that doctrine, training, and tactics superseded technological advantage. They used the terrain, the climate, and their intimate knowledge of the land to transform an impossible situation into a battle that, although strategically lost, was tactically won in ways still studied in military academies today. Let's examine the technical aspects that made the Mosin so suitable for marksman warfare. The barrel length, generally 800 mm in infantry versions, provided excellent exit velocity. This meant flatter trajectory at medium ranges, crucial for marksmen operating in varied terrain. The weight of the rifle, although heavy by modern standards at approximately 4 kilograms, helped absorb recoil and provided stability in aiming. The Mosin's trigger is often criticized for being heavy and with a bit of slack. And yes, compared to the crisp trigger of a well-adjusted Springfield, the Mosin loses. But here's what critics don't understand. A heavy trigger has advantages in real combat. It reduces accidental discharges in stress situations. It forces the shooter to be deliberate. And once you get used to it, consistency matters more than lightness. Experienced marksmen could completely compensate for the heavier trigger with proper training. The Mosin's iron sight was simple. An adjustable rear notch and a blade-type front sight. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was clear and quick to acquire. For marksman work, Soviet telescopic sights were added, and here we find another surprise. Soviet telescopic sights, particularly later ones like the PU, were robust and reliable. They didn't have the high-quality glass of German or American sights, but they functioned consistently in extreme conditions. The ammunition system was a 5-round stripper clip, loaded from the top. It was slower than modern systems, but perfectly adequate for marksman work where each shot is calculated. The ability to reload the rifle using disposable clips meant that in sustained combat, a marksman could maintain a reasonable rate of fire. And because the system was so simple, feeding problems were rare even in dirty conditions. Now we come to World War II, where Mosin Nagant production would reach numbers that defy comprehension. More than 17 million Mosin rifles were produced during the war. 17 million. For context, the United States produced about 4 million Springfield and Garand rifles combined during the same period. The Soviet Union was producing Mosin Nagants in numbers that transformed the very nature of military production. Soviet factories, many of them evacuated to the Urals when the Germans advanced, operated 24 hours a day. Workers, often women and children with the men at the front, produced rifles in conditions that today would be considered impossible. Tolerances were further relaxed. Finish became almost non-existent, but the rifles worked. And this is what mattered. Soviet marksmen using these economical rifles created legends of their own. Vasily Zaitsev, immortalized in the film Enemy at the Gates, used a Mosin Nagant during the Battle of Stalingrad to create a marksman warfare methodology that is taught to this day. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, the most successful female marksman in history, had extraordinary effectiveness with her Mosin during the conflict. And there were hundreds of others, men and women, who used this simple weapon to influence the course of individual battles. The Germans, with their sophisticated Mausers and their precision sights, deeply respected Soviet marksmen. There was a reason for this. A German marksman with a 2,000 mark rifle faced a Soviet marksman with a 100 ruble rifle. And effectiveness didn't depend on the price of the weapon. This wasn't about the weapon. It was about training, dedication, and the reality that in war, consistency surpasses perfection. Let's discuss something rarely addressed: the psychological impact of facing marksmen with Mosin Nagants. German soldiers knew that each movement needed to be careful and calculated. The distinct sound of a Mosin shot was recognizable on the battlefield. And because there were so many of these rifles, because they were everywhere, the presence of this threat was constant. The weapon was in every hand, able to operate from any defensive position. The Springfield, by comparison, was an elite weapon. American marksmen were well-trained and equipped, but they were relatively few. American doctrine emphasized volume firepower with semi-automatic rifles like the M1 Garand. Marksmen were specialists, not the norm. The Soviets, by necessity and philosophy, created a culture where every soldier could potentially be a marksman. The Mosin made this possible because anyone could learn to use it effectively. There is a story, possibly apocryphal but illustrative, of an informal test conducted by American officers after the war. They took 10 marksmen, 5 with Springfields and 5 with captured Mosin Nagants. At ranges from 100 to 300 meters, the accuracy differences were minimal. Beyond 300 meters, the Springfield showed advantage, but not as much as expected. And when they introduced factors like wind, rain, and dirt, the Mosin often equaled or surpassed the Springfield in reliability. This test revealed something that militaries don't like to admit. Technical specifications on paper rarely translate into superiority in the field. A rifle that is 5% more accurate in laboratory conditions may be less effective than a rifle that simply works every time, regardless of conditions. And when you consider that you can have 3 Mosin rifles for the price of 1 Springfield, the mathematics becomes even more interesting. We advance to post-World War II conflicts, and here the Mosin story becomes even more fascinating. While Western nations migrated to semi-automatic and then automatic rifles, the Mosin remained in service in dozens of countries. Not because these countries were technologically backward, but because the rifle still did the job it was designed for. Marksmen in conflicts from Korea to Vietnam, from Afghanistan to Africa, used Mosin Nagants with considerable effectiveness. During the Vietnam War, Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army marksmen used Mosin Nagants against American troops equipped with cutting-edge technology. And they were effective. There was something profoundly ironic about American soldiers, carrying M14 and M16 rifles, facing weapons that were older than their grandparents. But age didn't diminish technical effectiveness. The ballistic capability of a 7.62 mm cartridge remains consistent across decades. The Afghan conflict against the Soviets saw another interesting use of the Mosin. Mujahideen fighters used Mosin Nagants, often captured, against the same forces that originally produced them. The rifle's simplicity meant it could be maintained in the field with primitive tools. Its robustness meant it worked in the frozen mountains and scorching deserts of Afghanistan. And its effectiveness at long distances made it ideal for tactics in mountainous terrain. Today, in the 21st century, Mosin Nagants still appear in conflict zones. In Syria, in Ukraine, in parts of Africa, these rifles over a century old are still serving. This is not nostalgia or lack of modern alternatives. It is recognition that for certain applications, particularly long-range precision shooting by marksmen without access to modern logistics, the Mosin still works. Let's consider the broader legacy of this weapon. The Mosin Nagant proved that mass manufacturing of reliable weapons could change the global balance of power. Before the Mosin, quality weapons were the domain of wealthy nations with advanced industries. The Mosin demonstrated that with intelligent design and appropriate compromises, any nation with basic industrial capacity could arm an effective army. This lesson was not lost. The AK-47, probably the most successful weapon in history, followed the same philosophy. Simplicity, robustness, and mass production above refinement. This legacy spread. Many weapons developed in nations that couldn't compete with industrial powers in sophistication followed a similar model. The Belgian FAL, the German G3, many Chinese designs, all show influence from this philosophy. They may have more advanced technology than the Mosin, but they maintain commitment to reliability and producibility. Today, when we hold a Mosin Nagant, we hold more than an old weapon. We hold a piece of history that witnessed and influenced the most significant conflicts of the 20th century. We hold a reminder that ingenuity and pragmatism can overcome apparently superior resources. We hold proof that sometimes the right answer is not the most sophisticated, but the most appropriate. The comparison between the Mosin Nagant and the Springfield is not really about which weapon was better in absolute terms. It's about different design philosophies, different priorities, different contexts. The Springfield was designed by and for a wealthy industrialized nation with a tradition of skilled marksmen. The Mosin was designed by and for a nation that needed to arm millions quickly, that faced extreme conditions, that couldn't depend on sophisticated logistics. Both succeeded in their contexts. But if forced to choose, if we had to equip an army for prolonged modern warfare, which would we choose? The answer may surprise those accustomed to thinking that more expensive always means better. Given the real requirements of modern warfare, large-scale, varied conditions, need for absolute reliability, the Mosin or something following its philosophy may be the wiser choice. Not because it's technologically superior, but because it's appropriately designed. This is the final lesson that the $30 rifle teaches us. Value is not a function of price. Effectiveness is not a function of complexity. Success in any endeavor comes from truly understanding the problem you're trying to solve and designing the most appropriate solution, not the most impressive. The Mosin Nagant is a masterful case study in this principle. When we think of the great inventions that shaped history, we tend to celebrate the most dramatic and advanced. But there is equal greatness in something simple and perfectly suited to its purpose. The Mosin Nagant may not have the elegance of the Springfield, but it has something possibly more important: absolute suitability for the purpose for which it was created. And in this suitability, it found a form of excellence that transcends technical specifications. Soldiers who carried these weapons in battle understood this in a way external observers never could. They knew that when everything was falling apart around them, when they were exhausted, cold, afraid, the rifle in their hands would work. This confidence is priceless. It's the difference between having a weapon and having a partner in survival. And perhaps this is what truly distinguishes great weapons from merely well-made machines. Today, when elderly veterans speak about their experiences, many who carried Mosin Nagants speak with a kind of respect that goes beyond mere tool. They speak about a weapon that never let them down, that kept them alive, that did its job day after day without drama or failure. This is the reputation that money can't buy and technical specifications can't measure. It's earned in trenches, in frozen mountains, in extreme adverse conditions. The $30 rifle that fought against and often surpassed the finest Springfields America could produce is more than a historical anomaly. It's a reminder that we often seek excellence in the wrong places. We look in impressive specifications, in high prices, in intimidating complexity. But true excellence is often in doing the basics exceptionally well, in deeply understanding what really matters, in having the discipline not to add unnecessary complexity. This is a lesson that applies far beyond military rifles. It applies to how we approach problems in all areas of life. The most impressive solution is rarely the best solution. The solution that works consistently, that is reliable, that can be implemented and maintained by real people in real conditions, this is often the best solution. The Mosin Nagant is a monument to this truth. When the smoke of all the battles of the 20th century finally cleared, when historians began evaluating what really made a difference in military outcomes, the Mosin Nagant emerged not as a footnote, but as one of the most influential weapon designs ever created. Not for the technology it introduced, but for the philosophy it exemplified. Simplicity, robustness, suitability to purpose, and the refusal to sacrifice the essential on the altar of the impressive. So the next time you hear someone argue that more expensive is always better, that complexity is synonymous with quality, that advanced technology is always the answer, remember the $30 rifle that surpassed everything that was more expensive, more sophisticated, more technologically advanced. Remember that sometimes, just sometimes, less is genuinely more. And remember that true excellence often lies not in making something complicated, but in making something simple exceptionally well. This is the story of the Mosin Nagant. The rifle that shouldn't have worked so well, that shouldn't have lasted so long, that shouldn't have become legend. But it worked, it lasted, and it became legend not despite its simplicity, but because of it. $30 bought more than a weapon. They bought a lesson about value, about design, about what really matters when everything is at stake. It's a lesson that remains as relevant today as it was over a century ago. May we have wisdom to apply these lessons. May we have humility to recognize that sophistication doesn't always mean superiority. And may we have the good sense to value what works over what impresses. This is the enduring heritage of a simple rifle that changed the world. May the Lord God give us discernment to build things that truly serve their purposes, without vanity or unnecessary ornamentation, but with excellence where it truly matters.